You will fall in love with me. You will take me away from this place.
Full disclosure, news and commentary number 133, 133, 133, 133, 133. Yeah. Hope you are well. Spectrum. Internet is down. Cable is down. But I'm not down. I'm going to have to go, a lot of the show stuff, I'm going to have to go by memory. I think we'll be okay. New Patreon people, welcome, 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 as always. This is actually going to start off as a Platinum Show Investigations. Why is that? Because even though a lot of people have noticed, like, oh, I'm still posting stuff, but I post it at, instead of all over the map, which is when I used to post, now it tends to be at the same time. Why? I get up at 5 in the morning so I can get posting done in the morning before I go to a job that runs from 8 till 6, Monday through Friday. So sometimes I do stuff after, like now, and sometimes I do stuff in that morning period, which I've carved out. And then trying to get stuff done on the weekend. All kinds of videos coming out. But that doesn't mean I still don't go to wrestling shows, because this Saturday I'm going to ICW in Port Richey at the Pawn Shop. Another Iron Man death match. John Wayne Murdoch taking on Eric Ryan for an hour of a death match, which they've done before with somebody else, with Ornvate. But like this time, it's going to be bonkers because they're going to want to outdo the other one. I can't wait to see what they do. It'll be great to see Ron Nemi. It'll be great to hang out with Jeff. It's just going to be wonderful. So that's Saturday. Then Sunday, two of my favorite shows that happen here in Florida are happening on the same day, on a Sunday, no less. So at 4 o'clock is Mayhem on Mills, which is going to be in a new location, still in Orlando. So I'm curious to see that. Sawyer Wreck is in the main event against Troy Hollywood, their champion, and I believe Snoop Strikes in a three-way dance. You know I'm going to be there. I love Mayhem on Mills. I love live tweeting from their event. So I'm most definitely doing that. And then No Peace Underground is having a show Sunday night. So I'm going to that as well. And because ICW will have done a show the night before, there's going to be some ICW people who normally don't get a chance to do No Peace who are going to do No Peace. People like American Deathmatch champion John Wayne Murdoch, amongst others. So I'm looking forward to all of that. I'm going to be wiped out, but wrestling calls, and I always answer wrestling's call, and have since 1993. Before that, as a fan. The commentary is going to be me talking about how I got into wrestling, because I think it informs a lot of how I think about wrestling, how I continue to evolve my thinking about wrestling. But I realize not a lot of people know the origin of, like, how did I start watching? Because I realized with a lot of younger people, like, the Attitude Era was when they were a kid. And now we're having people for whom they didn't witness the Attitude Era because they're too young. Oh, boy. And for older people, this will hurt your heart. So if they're 20 years old, that means they were born in 2001. So there's a good chance that they weren't alive if they're 20 years old, but especially if they're younger, 19 or 18, that WCW wasn't even in business anymore, or ECW when they were alive. AWE, Larry just sent me kind of bare bones stuff. They drew over 112. Davey Richards couldn't be at the show because he was injured. But Buddy Murphy certainly was there, and taking pictures and having a grand old time. Looking forward to reading Larry's report. Like I said, internet stuff is down. That's really annoying, so I'll have to do a follow-up about that, because AWE, an important show, we got to talk about it, right? Speaking of important shows you got to talk about, Southern Fried pulled off that tag tournament. From all accounts, from that it was a great show. It went incredibly well. Happy Madness managed to retain and win that tournament to the delight of all. And they drew only 150, but it's the lean times, a little bit leaner. And they're just getting things going again. Speaking of getting things going again, Pro South did their show. And it was great to see. And it was great to hear about. I heard from a couple of the guys that were on the show that the gauntlet basically went too long. An hour and 24 minutes. Fuck me with a rusty knife. I'm not... Oh, that's way too much. But the main event between Southern Strong Style and the Undeniable was said to be very, very good. So great to see them in action again. And now let me look. GWF returned 130 for their Halloween-themed event in Tennille, Georgia. So good for them. They're the group, if you'll remember, that had to survive more Eric Nelson stranglehold bullshit. But they've come through in fine style, and they continue to draw in a very small town, but they're making their way, and their numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger overall, which is really, really wonderful to see. Cool. Got a lot of response based on the thing that I said about the video game. Both very pro and very con. Cool. I'm glad I've opened up a discussion. Certainly. I believe one of the people may have sent me a letter, but they did it via Facebook, and I'm not friends with them. And I have a general policy where I don't open up stuff that gets sent to me if I'm not friends with you on Facebook. There's a lot of reasons for that. I do get hate mail and stuff like that, and I'm just like, fuck that. I don't need that shit in my life. But if it does turn out it's from one of the people who's doing that video game, I will most certainly read it and if they're open for me talking about their response. I will say some of the responses I thought were really interesting. The ones that agreed with me obviously just agreed. And if some people sent me stuff of wrestlers declaring that it was the greatest moment of their lives, much like I had said, that they thought that I was exaggerating when I said that. I'm like, no, there are wrestlers who are wrestling people who are flat out acting like this is the biggest deal in the world. And I mean, congratulations on filling out an application. That's basically what it took to get on the game. They've told me, the people who designed the game, that their goal is to get 1,000 indie wrestlers on the thing. I think it's pretty noble. I get that part of it. Like I said, I don't hate the notion of the game. I hate the notion that the wrestlers are making way too much of it. But, is it cool if you're on it? I guess. But to formulate it in your mind as some kind of high accomplishment, to me, is absolutely asinine. Do I hate the people who designed the game? Certainly not. That's ludicrous. Anybody who came at me with that sort of angle, like, oh, no, why you hate, they're really good guys, never said they weren't good guys. Never said that they were pulling a con. I do think it's incredibly naive, but I see where they're coming from. They want to promote indie wrestling. Do I think them having some garbage wrestlers, and by their own admission, they have some wrestlers that are freaking garbage, but then they'll just keep their stats lower? Okay, I guess that's fine, but again, would I be excited to be associated with something that had garbage wrestlers on it as well? Probably less so. But for the most part, something I thought that was really interesting that the game creators did tell me was that the wrestlers, um, to every single one of them out of 600 have been nothing but like sort of really pleasant to deal with and surprisingly like cool about it. And only one wrestler, who is a named wrestler of note, was really stressed out about the money part of it. I think that was really silly, but it's exactly the person you would expect it to be. And I'll tell you on Patreon who it is. But yeah, like I was glad to open up that dialogue. You know, I always love the messages that start with well, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm glad people think so. Fucking of course I am, assholes. But yeah. Do I think that the thing is some kind of con? I need to clarify that because some people got that vibe that I was saying like it was some kind of hustle or a con. I don't think it's a hustle or a con. I think it's incredibly ambitious. And the people who are doing the game, I hope that they're not putting too many resources. Anytime you're spending time doing something, time is a resource, one of the most important, by the way. But you know, I hope they're not spending a lot of money on this thing. I hope they're not having to adjust their lives to do this thing. From the wrestlers, it requires very little. So I know I don't see any kind of risk there. In fact, the people who are running the game said, well, you know, and in fact, we told the wrestlers they didn't have to promote the fact that they were on it. Why wouldn't you encourage that? I think that's kind of silly. Especially as the game is going to come out, and they've given themselves a reasonable, like people were saying like, oh, you're being unreasonable, like they're giving themselves a reasonable window. Sure, yeah, we're going to open this game in a year. Yeah, it's doable. Because it's not like No Mercy 2021, right? They're not doing that. Like I said, it seems like it's more of like a general manager. You kind of match wrestlers up and then some kind of thing happens, but you're not actually like playing. Like I couldn't just play Tyreek, right? Because he's in the game or whoever. So is what it is. Cool. I'm sure there'll be much more to follow. And then once I read that letter, if it is indeed from one of the game people, I'll be sure to share that with you as long as that's okay with them. But it could just be them yelling at me. Calling me an asshole, whatever. Like, these are things that I hear often, and it's okay. And it's okay. So there's a lot of wrestling shows happening. And we're in October, folks. We're in mid-October. I saw where Anarchy is going to run a show again. Yay. Pro South is back. Yay. So it's good to see people doing their thing. I thought Simon Sermon put up an interesting post on his Facebook about how he would encourage wrestling groups to lower their ticket prices to $5 and get way more people in the door and then make your money up on the concessions. Of course, that is a solid plan. Probably wouldn't work for absolutely everybody, but I think it behooves a lot of groups. Now, some of the groups have just simply raised their ticket prices, right? Southern Fried has done that. Southern Honor did that to a minor extent a few months ago. KLT has done it as well. And I get that. Like, they've got expenses to cover. I ran a group myself. I know how it is. But Simon Sermon's thinking, I also get. Because getting more people in the door is what counts. When you have more people in the door, it's just a better atmosphere for your show, etc., 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 etc. Face to face. Oh, face to face. A couple of people have complained that my made-up theme song for face-to-face wrestling is incredibly addictive and an earworm. Of course it is. And I had to explain at length to somebody, if face-to-face really was a 90s sitcom, what would it be about? This is, by the way, this is all a setup for Face-to-Face changed owners. Apparently, the atmosphere at their last show was really, really great. That Richard has stepped away. Richard had a really gracious message, I thought. I thought it was nice that he said nice things about Simon Sermon. That was all well and good. The public face of it has changed, and they have a new champion, and they're filming the show, and everything seems like a positive move. Getting Fred Yehi to run the school, I think, was a good move. So, what is my plot to Face-to-Face, the 90s sitcom? And by the way, if they have a new owner, feel free to change the name. Face-to-Face has become the wrestling group in Georgia whose name that I dislike the most. I don't remember the last time I heard of Spinebusters. Everybody knows I hated Spinebuster. I've already acquiesced that we're just going to have groups that have Southern in their title. It is what it is. That's not the biggest deal in the world. I'll take that over being named after a wrestling move. Or Face-to-Face. What's the plot of Face-to-Face? Twin brothers, but separated at birth, so they didn't even know there was another twin. But by coincidence, when they were young men, they had sex with the same woman. And it's unknown which one of them had sex with her first, but she had sex with both of them, thinking it was the same person. Because they're twins. Years later, that woman has a child. Well, has a child 9 months afterwards. But doesn't tell either one of the twins about it. But now she has died. Because that's how 90s movies seem to run, and TV shows. Always was some kind of horrible tragedy. So she has died, and now that daughter, because it's got to be a precocious girl of a certain age, let's say 10. That way we can, if the show gets renewed for a couple of seasons, then we can have coming of age stuff, we can have puberty stuff, and we can have these twin men. So only recently, the twins have learned about one another, and they're really happy about it, and they're having this reunion, and it turns out they're very different kinds of people, even though they're twins, you know what I mean? One is like a rebellious Lothario type, and the other one is kind of a nice, quiet, nerdy type. And they're at this reunion that they're having, and they're so happy about it. And they're in the bachelor pad, right? And they're trying to make all these decisions together, and they're like, well, but at least nothing else could be more shocking. And at the end of the first episode, the pilot episode, bam, this girl shows up with an attorney in tow. See, the attorney is another character, because the attorney doesn't trust either one of these guys. And they're going to have to try to find out who the dad really is, as all of them come face to face with their new reality. Face to face. Change the name of your fucking wrestling groove to something cooler. Commentary. Face to face. God, shit's hot. By the way, before the commentary, last Friday, SmackDown ran 30 minutes longer, commercial free to fuck with Rampage. And Rampage, they did a thing, a buy-in YouTube show where they had Bryan Danielson against Minoru Suzuki, and it was fucking awesome. Folks, what a great time. What a great time. It's amazing. Crown Jewel is happening this week. Now, it's happening at noon Eastern Standard Time. 9 a.m. Pacific. It can be worse. We're going to get Lesnar against Roman Reigns, and with the Paul Heyman saga and all the what a great time in wrestling. I got now I have to start paying for Peacock. And so that charge came up and I had the nerve to look mad about it. I was like, $2.50. It's highway robbery. Well, it almost is because, God, Peacock sucks. Sucks as a streaming service. Holy crap. I will stream pee into their fucking face for being so shitty at it. Commentary. So, did I know that pro wrestling existed when I was a small child? Yes. Wasn't really into it, though. 1983 or 4. Let's go around there. I had older friends, Donovan and Rabinder. What, Steve? Rabinder. A name I had not heard previous to him or since. Rabinder. But they were older. Like, they were 18 when I was like, do the math, 10 or 11. But they hung out with me because I was smart and we would play Dungeons and Dragons. So usually with me running the game. So we'd play Dungeons and Dragons in Donovan's garage. By the way, he was a strange sort of dude. He only had one song on one side of a cassette that he had dubbed over and over and over and over. And it was Safety Dance. And on the other side, same song over and over and over. It was Insects by Oingo Boingo. I realize now that both Donovan and Rabinder were weird kind of dudes. In fact, they had this shed near Donovan's pool. He had a pool in Hawaii. Big deal. Had a pool. Where they would go make model airplanes. And the ones they would just leave and then go make, and then they would come back and they'd be all loopy. And I didn't realize, this is how naive I was at that age, that they were sniffing glue. But I didn't realize it. Another funny thing about those games that we would have, Dungeons and Dragons, it's Hawaii. So in lieu of an ice cream truck, they had a shave ice truck, which is way better, trust me. In any case, Donovan and Rabinder, sometimes they were just sort of obnoxious young dudes. And so sometimes when the shave ice man would see them coming to the shave ice truck, he would speed up and make them run 2 blocks before they were allowed to buy anything from him, which I thought was fucking hysterical even at that age. In any case, sometimes Donovan and Rabinder, we would play the game, play Dungeons and Dragons or other things, but mostly Dungeons and Dragons. And sometimes they would get bored of me because I was super young. And so they were like, we're going to go off and sniff some glue or we're going to do whatever. But we would all just sort of hang out. Donovan was also a guy, I remember he had like Star Wars. He would somehow get like bootleg recordings of stuff. And so we would watch that. But Donovan's mom, I don't really remember if Donovan's dad lived with them. I don't remember seeing him very often. But I remember the mom. And the mom would go like, hey, you guys want to watch wrestling with me? And Donovan and Rabinder would be like, no, we're not watching that dumb shit. But one of these times where Donovan and Rabinder were off doing their own thing, I was like, sure, I'll watch with you. And what was it? World Class Championship Wrestling. Because she loved the Von Erichs. She loved the Von Erichs. I recognize it for what it is now. We may not recognize this in modern wrestling, but she was like feeling sexed up because of the Von Erichs. And that doesn't really apply to wrestling nowadays. As somebody once asked the great Bill Watts, where are the blowjobs? Meaning, where do you have the young, good-looking people that gets teenage girls hot? Where are the blowjobs, pro wrestling? Where are the blowjobs in your organization? You don't think that way. That's why you're not drawing as well. Get some blowjobs. And get some teenage girls and young women to watch your shit. Who just aren't necessarily just into pro wrestling, but are actually like, oh, look, attractive men. Or dudes to attract gay men. Whatever. Just saying. In any case, she was really into World Class Championship Wrestling because of Von Erichs. I was into World Class Championship Wrestling because of Bruiser fucking Brody. Not because I wanted to fuck him, but there was something about him that was amazing. And by coincidence, they had an ad for like local wrestling, Polynesian wrestling, and Bruiser Brody was going to be there because sometimes Polynesian wrestling, they were part of the NWA, so sometimes they would get crossover stuff. Sometimes they would do, like, I saw Ric Flair against Kerry Von Erich for the NWA title at Aloha Stadium. Like, big shit would happen in Hawaii in the 80s. And they had a sort of a crossover deal with New Japan, I believe. So you get to see Japanese guys too. Now we got All Japan, New Japan. We got all that stuff in Hawaii. So once I started getting into wrestling, and it didn't take long because I went to a show and Bruiser Brody knocked down a bunch of chairs and swung his chain and hit the referee and got disqualified and beat the shit out of this jabron and then left in another part of the ring and knocked down a bunch of chairs, and I was hooked. That was wrestling for me. And then I watched and then I watched everything starting at about age 10 or 11. I would watch everything. And Hawaii was a great place because you got to see it all. Everything from the AWA, Georgia Championship Wrestling. Of course, we had the Superstation. So, you know, when the Crockett stuff came along, we watched all of that. We watched the WWF, but we hated them the most. My friends Dylan, especially, my friend Dylan Leong. We would watch wrestling together. Sometimes we'd call each other on the phone and we'd watch. And we were happy to see like the Road Warriors come out and kill jabronis. Like that was like one of our favorite things to do. We tolerated the WWF. We would talk about it. Mostly we would talk about it because there were guys on there that we recognized from wrestling magazines. And I got full into the wrestling magazine thing. And so I read up and I knew about stuff. And when I had the chance to see things, when things would come through Hawaii, AWA would come to Hawaii a couple times a year, WWF usually like once a year with a really big show or a really shitty show. There was no middle ground. It just depended on where they were on tour, that kind of thing. That started my wrestling journey. The first wrestling that I remember really falling in love with, though, was Mid-South, which became UWF. That was probably the most direct influence on my booking at the time. And then I would read about Florida, and then I just pursued every little bit of knowledge of wrestling I could. Like nowadays you have shows like Heels. You have fucking fictional accounts of indie wrestling in Georgia on a cable station. Like, what the fuck? Like, that shit did not exist. We watched the shittiest shit. As long as it had to do with pro wrestling, we were going to watch it. I was not going to miss John Stossel in 2020. I was not going to miss it. I watched it as it happened. Watched him get fucking smacked by Dr. David D. Right? And I knew who David Schultz was because I was watching WWF. I was watching it. Right? Before Hulkamania. That's kind of crazy to think about. But that Bill Watts shit really affected how I thought about wrestling. And the Baba booked, because keep in mind, once the 90s hit, Baba changed how Japanese wrestling was booked. And so Eddie Graham, not in this order, but Eddie Graham, Bill Watts, Giant Baba affected booking. Because Baba went from this thing of, if it was an unimportant show, you would just have double countouts and time limit draws, and nothing would ever happen unless it was the big show. And Baba changed that. Baba made it so the quality of the shows went up, and they had clean finishes almost all the time in every match. And that was revolutionary. That probably has a bigger influence, along with the Monday Night Wars, than on the free television that you see now, why it's booked the way it is. It's indirectly because of Baba. Think about that. Because it was no longer good enough to just have like squashy, 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 squash, or squash, 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 indeterminate finish, indeterminate finish, indeterminate finish, to have gimmick matches or payoffs or blow-offs on big shows. They had to completely restructure how they did it because of Baba. Because Baba recognized, like, we're going to kill this audience dead if we don't change. Brilliant. He doesn't get enough credit. Well, I'm giving him fucking credit now. So obviously I was influenced by all of those ways of thinking, right? People go like, Steve, you're really nitpicky about shit. That's because of Eddie Graham, because Florida always made sure that baby faces never looked stupid. They never had a baby face get beat up in the middle of the ring by a bunch of heels. That's something that didn't happen. Oh gosh, my cable's back. Yay. They never have that happen. Or they would say earlier, oh, you know, Dusty Rhodes and blah, blah, blah have to go to this charity event to explain why the top baby faces weren't there when this other baby face was getting beat down and they didn't come save him. Nowadays, they just don't give a fuck. In fact, I often comment, if you ever listen to my show reviews, I just go like, well, I guess everybody hates blank because he's sitting there getting the shit beat out of him and nobody's coming out to help him. I hate that lack of detail nowadays. Bill Watts was the master at like hooking and dragging you to the next show. And Baba was the master of finding ways to make big shows still mean something when you weren't just treating the rest of your shows like trash. So those are my booking influences. So my question is to wrestling people, especially bookers and promoters or whatever, what are your influences? Now, they don't have to necessarily be wrestling, but I would hope that you would have some. What's the style of wrestling that you think is the coolest? What is the best booked promotion that you can recall? And if you can tell me what you think the best booked promotion was, how close are you to embodying their mindset? I bet the answer is not very close. Maybe you should take a look at that. Maybe you should. Because I like to revisit in my mind what made me love wrestling, what got me into wrestling. And I made sure I try to embody those things that I found fascinating. Because there's a good chance that it still works. If you hate shows where it seems like there aren't slow burn angles, does your promotions that you work for have them? And if not, why not? And if they don't, maybe you could contribute an idea or two and do that. If you're an ECW guy, do the promotions that you work for or you yourself embody that spirit in any way, shape, or form? If you grew up in the Attitude Era and you think it was the greatest shit of all time, more power to you. Could you walk into that locker room if you're a wrestler and work on an Attitude Era show? And if not, why not? And how could you get there? It's one thing to say that you have influences, but often when people say that they have influences, it's just to flex. And in no way, shape, or form do I see where those influences have influenced them. Perhaps it's because they're posing, or perhaps it's because they don't really understand. Do this as an exercise and you'll be happy for it. Your influences that you would cite, the things that inspired you, how deep of a dive have you done in studying what worked and what didn't, and how could you help embody and bring about the things that worked for you so that you, in turn, can inspire others? That's how wrestling is going to continue to grow and evolve and get better. This has been Full Disclosure.